you've got to wear all three at the same time.
Good job. Okay. Phil, oops. When Phil is en route, we have talked to his office, heard from his office. Kathy, what do you regard as the most important qualities? Kathy Patterson chaired the Judiciary Committee, and you get to confirm or not confirm, as the case may be, up until now, Attorney Generals. So what do you look for, or what should we look for as the most important qualities in an Attorney General?
Well, I can speak to the kinds of things that we looked at when I had the privilege of doing Bob's confirmation hearing, and some of the kinds of things that we questioned. And I think I would underscore some of the characteristics that he just described. You are looking to test whether the person in fact is a good lawyer, because if you're going to lead a troop of lawyers that represents the law, does the law business of the district, someone ought not simply to be a very good lawyer, but to be known to be a very good lawyer. That's one thing. The issue of management was also mentioned by Bob. I think that's another critical issue, management and leadership skills. And I guess the other thing that I would really focus on would be judgment, and always knowing who it is that you're working for, and being able to parse among the various clients that you would have in any given significant case. Because you are in charge of the law business of the District of Columbia. You do represent agencies, but your ultimate client is essentially everyone in this room. Your ultimate client are the residents of the District of Columbia. And sometimes that can take you in different directions, thinking in terms of a particular agency versus in terms of the greatest good for the community that you serve. And so you need to really look for someone who has the maturity and the judgment to be able to really make those critical calls. I think those are several of the things that I will certainly be looking for in candidates who offer themselves for this job.
Terrific. Peter, you have a checkered past. No, what I mean is you brought a tremendous set of experiences to the job. I should say I was on the Blue Ribbon Commission that chose Bob Spagnoletti, or recommended him to then Mayor Tony Williams. I testified in the confirmation hearings for Irv and for Peter, but I'm not to blame for those guys, right? So I've been, and I also testified in favor of having an elected Attorney General. And so I've been very, very involved, but there's so much to this that I'm learning something from every answer. So I'm very, very happy that we're doing this. But Peter, getting back, you brought a rich set of experiences. I'd like you to just take a minute talking about that. What kinds of experiences stood you in good stead when you became the Attorney General?
I think one has to remember that despite my lengthy experience, I was confirmed by the City Council by one vote. When I was asked by Kojo Nnamdi at one time what my greatest regret was as Attorney General, it was that I was too easy on the City Council. I sued the district for 35 years, starting with the Dixon case involving mental health, assistance for kids, disabled kids, kids in foster care. Those were important cases, and it showed me the decay and the culture of corruption in the city. And when I became Attorney General, one of the reasons I did so was to see whether there was any excuse for this kind of corruption. This is a great city. It's the nation's capital. And I must say that despite all the experience I had being a trial lawyer for major cases around the United States and around the world for some 35 to 40 years, and having sued the district for some 35 years, and then coming face to face with the manner in which the district was run, it was unbelievable. So an elected Attorney General has the obligation not only to do the cases that we did on gun regulation as an aftermath of the Heller case, on gay marriage, to promote economic development with the convention center. But I think the Attorney General has the obligation to root out corruption. The kind of corruption we have seen and are seeing, that I saw initially with the Harry Thomas matter, continuing through the chairman of the city council, Kwame Brown, and Michael Brown, and of course my old favorite, Marion Barry, now implicating the mayor. An individual who has $300 or $400 million worth of contracts with the city, who's at the center of a ghost campaign. I think we can talk about all the niceties of the Attorney General's office and how big it is, and how many divisions, how many offices, but at root, as the chief legal officer of this fine, great city, with an obligation to the people of the city, corruption needs to be rooted out. And I remember talking with, I won't mention the individual who was still working with the city council. I was having coffee one day at my favorite coffee place, and he came by and said, "Good to see you, Mr. Nichols. You know, the happiest day for the city council was when you left office. There was a lot more work to be done, and I hope the next elected Attorney General does it." Wow.
Well, I want to respond to that because I don't think that it's appropriate to mislead the audience in terms of corruption. In the first place, of course, it was our office that brought the case against Harry Thomas, who had stolen $400,000 that was scheduled for Little League baseball. But we had to bring that case as a civil case. It was a civil complaint that we laid out in detail what happened, because the Congress has decided that it's the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia that has all the felony jurisdiction. The Attorney General's office, and this is very important to understand what people are voting for and what they will elect, it is not going to be the chief law enforcement officer in the District of Columbia, because the Attorney General does not have felony jurisdiction and cannot bring criminal cases. Now, let me say, I have worked with the Department of Justice and with Eleanor Holmes Norton and with members of Congress to change that, but it's very difficult and it's not going to happen overnight. I think the Attorney General should have significant criminal jurisdiction, but the truth of the matter is, and that you shouldn't vote for an Attorney General thinking that they're going to bring criminal cases, serious felony cases, against public officials. It shouldn't be misled in this way. I do think there is an absolute role for the Attorney General in terms of corruption, as Peter is suggesting, and we have done that with respect to civil cases that we've brought. We did it with respect to the legislation that created BIGA, which Bob very ably chairs and which has done a very good job.
What's BIGA, just for the uninitiated?
BIGA is an ethics board. It's the Board on Ethics and Government Accountability, and it has responsibility for the ethics of government officials, including the city council. And we have proposed significant legislation to deal with campaign financing, which I also think is part of the responsibility of the Attorney General and the elected Attorney General. But it is not the place that is going to root out corruption. And I can also say, I need to say this, having served in this administration for the last 3 years, I have not seen in the administration, in the executive branch of the District of Columbia, any cutting of corners, any kind of corruption or impropriety in the handling of government matters. Now, we've had serious problems at the City Council, there's no question about that, and problems elsewhere. But with respect to the agency directors, the mayor, and people who are running the deputy mayors and others in the executive branch, I've seen no evidence of this corruption.
Bob, I feel that you should get an opportunity.
I mean, I think that, Irv is right. As a practical matter, people should understand that the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I proudly served there for 13 years before I became the Attorney General.
And I did want you to tie in, what experiences did you bring to the table that held you in good stead for the role?
All right, I'll finish that sentence and because I think that is important. So the U.S. Attorney's Office jealously holds on to its authority to prosecute local criminal offenses, the vast majority of them in the district. And it is not likely to happen anytime soon that Congress is going to relinquish that power, because it's a home rule matter, to the Office of the Attorney General, because that the skills that come to the attorneys at the U.S. Attorney's Office from prosecuting low-level cases and the information they get than building larger cases is too valuable to give up. Also requires a shifting of an enormous amount of resources to the District of Columbia, millions and millions of dollars. They've got, I don't know, 275 prosecutors in the Superior Court, 175 in the Superior Court Division. That's not going to happen anytime soon.
They have the FBI.
And they have the, right, exactly. So for people who are interested in running for the position, step one is just to get, in my view, to get used to the idea of an elected attorney general developing the relationship that is going to then exist with the mayor. Because that's going to be a big enough job without taking on 26,000 new criminal cases currently being handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office. All right. That being said, there is a great relationship, and has always been a good relationship between OAG and the U.S. Attorney's Office when it comes to sharing of information. Not that they don't bump heads from time to time, but as a general matter, it works pretty well. And so, because there's a lot of overlap in the cases that get handled. For example, they handle prostitution, OAG handles indecent exposure. I know it's a silly example, but those cases come together on a regular basis. They have to talk to each other. Prosecuting, folks for local tax evasion and federal tax evasion, those things come together. The experience that I had received at the U.S. Attorney's Office was, I think, what got me appointed to the position. I mean, because I wasn't connected or tied to anybody in the Williams administration. But I was the chief of the sex offense and domestic violence section. We had about 60 lawyers handling misdemeanors for felonies, all kinds of sexual assault, domestic violence, child maltreatment cases, including child homicide cases. And in doing that, I had to touch lots of different parts of the DC government: child abuse and neglect, civil protection orders, domestic violence, the Superior Court system on a regular basis. And even though I didn't personally have experience in so much else, I had very little civil litigation experience, for example. The combination of the actual trial experience on my feet, doing that kind of work, managing lawyers, which, by the way, is no easy feat, and lawyers are, in my experience, not always the best managers. And so finding a lawyer who could manage as well as being a lawyer was, I think, fairly important. And understanding the District of Columbia. I was scared to death when I was appointed. Excited, but scared to death, because I knew I would suddenly be responsible for things that I couldn't even spell half the things I was now responsible for. But Judge Farron, who had served as corporation counsel, took me out to lunch beforehand, and he said, "I'm going to give you a piece of advice. You're never going to figure out the bond work. It's just never going to happen."
That was his personal
can't
plug.
spell.
I mean, seriously, whether it was personal to me or not, he was right. I mean, it was just never going to happen. He said, "Find person X." He told me person X. Have him read everything before it comes to your desk. Rely on his judgment. Trust his judgment. And once I got past that, I realized that as long as I had a small group of people around me that I trusted absolutely, and who are not afraid to tell me no, also critically important in this job, that I would be okay. And so after the first year of craziness, it all settled down, I think, fairly nicely.
Very good.